Hello and welcome to GuitarSpeak. I'm Bryan Sing. Today we're going to talk about an iconic guitar in rock and roll history, the Gibson Les Paul and its variants. First up we have a Gibson Les Paul Studio. It's called the Studio because it is a less expensive model using less beautiful woods and is of lighter weight because the internal parts of it have been hollowed out. This is a good guitar for just about any application. Up from the Studio model are the standard models, which feature maple tops and fine woods that are very beautiful, like a fine piece of furniture. In a lot of guitars, what you're paying for as the price goes up is the beauty of the wood. Most Les Pauls are divided into a back and a cap, sometimes maple, sometimes mahogany, and this particular model has a rosewood fretboard. Gibson has recently gone to baked maple in their fretboards, and some models have been made in ebony, both by Gibson and by other manufacturers. This is the Les Paul Studio, and you can see it has two humbuckers and the Tune-o-matic bridge, and this is called the stop bar tailpiece, which is on most Gibson Les Pauls. This one is fairly light and features all mahogany construction, including a mahogany cap, and you can see how the tops of most Les Pauls are carved. And the top usually has a seam about right here where the top is glued onto the mahogany back. Next up we have a 2006 Gibson Les Paul Special. This differs from most Les Pauls in that it does not have a carved maple top. Since it doesn't have a carved top, it is a bit thinner than most Les Pauls, which reduces its weight a great deal. They also have what's called the faded finish, which is a thin and inexpensive finish with no polish on it. This guitar also features P90 single coil pickups, which we will discuss later in the episode also. It's a very stripped down model. It's also unique in that it has a double cutaway here so that you have better access to the higher frets. Another design feature of this model is that it does not have a carved maple top. The top is flat, just like the back, and as such it's a bit thinner, and as such it's much lighter than your typical Les Paul with a thick maple cap. The faded models do not have a clear coating on them, and thus the parts that touch your body, like the neck here, tend to wear rather quickly. This guitar hasn't been played a whole lot, yet is wearing through the finish quite a bit. You can also see the same phenomenon here where your arm touches the guitar. If you like a well-worn or relic look, a faded finish may be the way to go for you. This is a Gibson SG, which at one time was called a Les Paul, from about 1960 to 1963. The reason is Fender was beating Gibson by producing less expensive instruments with bolt-on neck construction, and Gibson's market share was plummeting. They needed a less expensive design. They called this the Les Paul, but Les Paul did not like this design. So in 1963, the name of this design was changed to the Gibson SG, short for solid guitar. This guitar has no top or cap, as it's called, and is thinner than a Les Paul, and thus much lighter. I was able to borrow this SG which has the beautiful factory nitrocellulose finish. You can see that the guitar is very much like the Les Paul, except that it is quite a bit thinner, and the top is flat and the back is flat, and it weighs a great deal less, easier on your back. We'll talk about Les Paul weights a little bit later, and we'll actually weigh all these guitars so that you can see the differences. Next up is an Epiphone Les Paul. Epiphone is a Gibson subsidiary that used to be a competitor. Gibson bought Epiphone to shut them down and then reopened their doors in the 1980s, producing a budget line of guitars. The Epiphone line is the only fully licensed and authorized version of the Gibson Les Paul. Epiphone guitars are currently made in China, but have been made in Indonesia, Korea, and a long time ago in the United States. They represent a great value, and there's much debate on whether a Gibson Les Paul is worth the extra money. Some of the differences between them might be the quality of the finish, the quality of the woods, and of course being made in a country with cheap labor versus being made in the United States. This particular Epiphone Les Paul was made in China in 2006 and features a flame maple top, which is actually a veneer being a very thin, almost paper thin sheet of beautiful wood that's attached over a less attractive piece of wood to make it beautiful. Very common in furniture making. As such, it is considered not to be of as high quality as if you had this piece of wood being the full thickness on a Les Paul, which would bring it to about right here. This particular guitar is extremely heavy, which many players prefer. The fit and finish are fantastic, and it's very high quality all the way around. This Epiphone Les Paul was made in China in 2011. This model is called the Traditional Pro. It features a non-glossy finish on the back and a much lighter weight than the standard guitar that we just showed you. And it features two zebra stripe pickups, humbuckers as they're called, and a gold top, which is a classic Gibson color. The fit and finish on this guitar is great. It has a polyurethane finish, as most modern guitars do. The higher end Gibsons will have a nitrocellulose finish, which cost quite a bit more to produce because of environmental concerns and the drying and preparation time it takes. This guitar features coil taps so that the guitar's humbuckers can be split to where you can just use one half of it, giving it a single coil sound, more like a Strat or Telecaster. This guitar features a non-glossy finish on the back and the neck, and you can see that the pores in the wood have not been filled, giving it kind of a rough appearance. Many players prefer this, but some prefer the plastic finish and perfectly level. This is a limited edition, custom shop it says, which I think is just marketing hype, but a very nice guitar anyway, and much closer to the weight of the early Les Pauls, which used Honduran mahogany, which was very dry and thus very lightweight. This one weighs almost 2 pounds less than the one we showed you just a moment ago. This Les Paul Traditional Pro weighs in at about 7 pounds and 13 ounces. This 2006 Epiphone Les Paul Standard Plus Top weighs in at about 9 pounds 11 ounces. Almost 2 pounds more than the Traditional Pro. This guitar is for somebody with a strong back or somebody with a preference for the tone of a heavy guitar. This particular guitar is the Gibson SG, and it was purchased by a female who is very sensitive to weight and does not like heavy guitars. This is an extremely light example at 6 pounds 11 ounces. This is our Gibson Les Paul Studio, and it weighs in at about 6 pounds 11 ounces. This is pretty light for a Les Paul, and one of the reasons for it is the studio models are chambered or hollowed out beneath the top, and so a lot of wood is removed, essentially making it a hollow body in a way. Some players like it, some people can't stand it. It's kind of up to you and the individual guitar you're looking at. This is the 2006 Gibson Special Les Paul. It weighs in at 6 pounds and 15 ounces. Here we've lined them all up side by side so you can see their relative thicknesses, which has a great deal to do with the weight. The real Gibson Les Paul is about 1.9 inches thick. This one is about 1.85. The Special with no carved top is about 1.5 inches. And the SG is about 1.4 inches. The thickness of the body, as well as the type of wood used, will have a lot to do with the weight. I want to talk a little bit about P90s and single coil pickups. If you're a high gain player or a metal player, you probably want to use humbuckers. The reason is single coil pickups are very noisy. We've got the amp straight into the guitar and the volume is moderate. And as we move the guitar with humbuckers around in front of it, you really don't hear any noise. However, if we switch these pickups to single coil pickups, cutting them in half and eliminating the humbucking, you can hear the noise increase. And that noise will increase even more when you add pedals or an effects chain in front of it. So many modern players prefer humbucking pickups. We'll try this test on a P90 as well. These pickups are hot single coil pickups and do not reduce hum. Therefore, these are even noisier than the ones before, which were somewhat smaller and less hot. Some players prefer a single coil sound, but it is usually most suited for lower gain or less distortion or more clean sounds. For high gain or heavy metal, you probably want to go with a humbucker. So, which Les Paul is right for you? There are a few things to consider. First of all, your budget and the guitar's cost. If you're a beginner, you're probably best served by a low-budget model while you learn your preferences. Another big factor for many players is weight, especially older players or those with disabilities or back problems. Les Pauls can be extremely heavy guitars, and they can vary in weight up to 5 pounds. So you need to check each one individually and make sure it is of an acceptable weight to you. Many gigging musicians keep their fine high-end guitars at home safe while using cheaper models for live performing. This minimizes the loss in case of damage or theft. Another issue is tone. This is highly subjective. Some people claim there is a huge difference between a low-end guitar and a high-end guitar that costs 5 times as much. Sometimes there are differences, but the amount of the difference, or whether the difference is better or worse, is entirely in the ear of the beholder. In live situations, there's a lot of noise and sound waves bouncing around, and most people will not be able to tell what headstock logo your guitar has by the way it sounds. Another issue would be just pride of ownership. Having a beautiful guitar is a wonderful thing. You can show it off to your friends and display it proudly, and it will sound good if you do your part. However, a beginner with a very expensive guitar may look something like a poser. I sound like me no matter what guitar I'm playing. I'm sure all the greatest players such as Slash and Jimmy Page do too. And a bad player sounds like himself no matter how expensive the guitar he is using is. For me, the ideal weight of a Les Paul, or any guitar for that matter that's electric, is in the 7 to 8 pound range. I do not believe the additional weight imparts any tonal benefits. There are those who will argue the opposite. Guitars are a mass-produced item. You have to evaluate them on an individual basis. Just because it has a expensive price tag and a big name logo on it doesn't mean it's a great guitar, and just because it's a knockoff made in China does not mean it is a bad guitar. With the less expensive models, you are open to trying different electronics and pickups as your style evolves. Please post your comments below. Thanks for tuning in to GuitarSpeak, and happy jamming!